All right, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and I've been going over the PowerPoint presentations for Murachs, JavaScript, and jQuery, 3rd edition, for the AWD, Application and Web Development, 1000 Web Technologies class. I'm up to Chapter 16 of 18. It's the last chapter I plan on doing today, and tomorrow, when I come in, I plan on finishing the book up and doing the lectures on Chapters 17 and 18 if I can get them both done. So, let's jump in. We have 2 applied objectives, and we have, it looks like, 7 knowledge objectives. Our applied objectives: use arrays in applications, use associative arrays and arrays of arrays, also known as multidimensional arrays, in application. Describe the creation and use of a JavaScript array. Describe the use of indexes and the length property for working with an array. Describe between the use of a for statement and the for in statement for working with an array. Describe the array objects push, pop, unshift, shift, splice, slice, concat, join, is array, index of, and last index of methods. And describe the use of functions as parameters for the sort, map, and filter. Describe the split method of the string object, and distinguish between a, quote, regular array, an associative array, and an array of arrays. To me, this is a very important chapter to go through, and I will be going through it in much more depth and breadth of coverage in class, because virtually every programming language that you work with supports arrays. All right, I define an array as a set of contiguous memory locations. All right, now, when you create an array in JavaScript, that's not always true. In some programming languages, when you create an array, it's like you take a bunch of variables of the same type and give them one name. So if I had a class with 20 students in it, rather than creating 20 variables and have student 1, student 2, student 3, all the way through student 20, I could create an array called students, and I could give it a name and a size of 20 as an example. There's 2 basic ways to create an array. One is more the object-oriented looking way, all right? And the other one is just by using brackets, as are shown right there. So an array is an object that contains one or more items. Each item in the array is called an array element, all right? Each of these elements can be a primitive data type, or it can even be a complex object. I believe we talk about objects in Chapter 17. And yes, we do. I didn't know if it was 17 or 18. We sort of do in both chapters, to be honest with you. All right. Arrays have a length. The length of the array is the number of elements that are going to be in the array. So this shows you the 2 ways to create an array. When you use this first method right here, you use the new keyword with what's called the array constructor right here. All right, and you can put a number of elements in there. When you use the second method, you don't have to. One thing about arrays is arrays are basically handled, they're what are known as late binded. And what that means is arrays, the size of them is all determined at runtime. What that means is arrays can grow and shrink dynamically as the program is running. Most programming languages are what are called early binded, which means that when you set up, when the program is going to be compiled, an array, you give it a size and then you can't change the size. That is not the case in JavaScript. So an array can store one or more elements. Those elements do not have to be of the same type in JavaScript. The length of the array is the number of elements in the array. If you create an array without specifying the length, the array doesn't contain any elements. When you create an array of one or more elements without assigning values to them, each element is set to the word undefined. To refer to array elements, you use an index, sometimes called a subscript, where it starts counting at 0. So the first element is element 0, the second element is element 1, etc. So here's 2 examples on how you can create different arrays. All right. There is one property and one operator that you can use to help modify arrays. To add an element to the end of an array, you can use the length property. And length also shows the current number of elements in the array. From 0 to the length minus 1 is how you reference them. The delete operator deletes the contents of an array and sets the element to undefined, but it doesn't remove the element from the array. All right, so notice here we've got an array with 1, 2, 3, 4 elements in it. All right? So the length of the array is 4, but there are elements 0, 1, 2, 3. So if we do this, if we say the name of the array dot length, that will always put a new value at the end of the array. So now the length of the array is 5. So again, to add an element to the end of an array, you can use the length property. There's other ways of doing it as well. To add an element to a specific index, you use its index to refer to the element, and I think there's an example of that right here. Okay, so notice we've got 0, 1, 2, 3, or we got 4 elements. Now we put something in element 6. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. There's nothing in 5. And there's nothing in 6. Because now there are a total of 0, 1, 2, 3, 0, 1, 2, 3, nothing in 4, nothing in 5, and 6. So that's what it would look like. And here's how you can delete. This is sometimes known as a sparse array. All right? And you can even make it bigger than this. If I said here number 600, then I'd have a 1, 2, 3, and a 4 in locations 0, 1, 2, and 3. Nothing in locations 5 through 598, and then this would be the a 7. That's a real sparse array, where you have a large number of elements but few assigned elements. So here's how you can remove all the elements in the array by literally just setting the length to 0. Okay? Now, arrays are meant to work with loops. So here's an example of putting the numbers from 1 through 10 into an array. They made this a lot harder than it had to be, but it's fine. Here's code that displays that array. So this is filling the array, and then this is displaying the array. Notice we even added a blank space between each one so they didn't run together. So you typically use a for loop to work with an array, and there's a special kind of for loop that we'll look at in just a minute. But with a for loop, you can use the counter for the loop as the index for the array, which is the way it's normally done. All right. So here's a way that we can add all these values up right here. Then when we get done, outside of the loop, we can take that sum of these 4 elements, divide them by 4, and get the average. And they show an example of what that would look like here. All right. JavaScript, like many other languages, has a special kind of for loop that makes it easier to work with arrays and other kind of data structures that are known as collections. Okay? This is a for in loop, and it doesn't require, like a for loop does, where the for loop has an initialization, a test, and an increment. All right, the for in just declares a variable on the spot in the name of the current array. All right, now a couple things about this. The for in loop is designed to go through the entire array, not through just part of it. All right, that's the first thing. The second thing is you're not supposed to change the values in the array while you're going through it. So the code that you see right here, and I think it's also shown in your book on page 473, shows you some examples and some differences between using a straight for loop and using a for in loop. All right. So notice with a for loop, if you want, you can take some of the ones in here that are undefined and not show them or whatever. But with the for in loop, which is what it's called, you've got to go through it and do work with each array element. All right. Now, on pages 474 and 475, the author goes through some of the major methods that you will use with an array object. You've got push, which adds element to the end of the array, pop, which removes elements from the end of the array, unshift, which removes elements from the beginning of the array, shift, to remove the first array element. Unshift adds elements to the beginning of the array, shift removes the first element from the array, reverse, which reverses the order, splice, which allows you to kind of cut into the array, slice, which returns a new array, concat, which allows you to combine two arrays, join, which converts all the elements of an array into strings, toString, which is the same as join without any parameters passed to it, toLocalString, which is the same as toString but it's locale specific, isArray, which checks to see if the object passed to it is an array or not, index of, which returns the first index at which the parameter is found, or -1 if it's not found, starting from the beginning, and last index of, which returns the last one. So these first 7 methods that are shown right here modify the original array. The other 8 methods that are shown here produce a new array. And the last 3 here, the isArray, the index of, etc., they're part of the ES5. Remember, the ECMA, or the ECMA, is the European Computer Manufacturers Association, which kind of runs JavaScript. And ES, I believe, is the ECMA spec. All right, so 5, that's when these were created. Now, there are other methods of an array object that accept functions as parameters. There's sort, which allows you to sort an array, for each, which accepts a function that's executed once for each array element, every, which accepts a function that tests each element in the array to see if it meets a condition, sum, which accepts a function that tests each element to see if it meets a specified condition, map, which accepts a function that's executed once for each element and returns a new array, filter, which accepts a function that is executed once for each element, returns a new array, reduce, which accepts a function that returns all elements reduced to one value, and reduce right, which accepts a function that returns all the elements reduced to one value in descending order. So the sort method moves undefined elements to the end of the array, and for everything else, basically what does sort do? It sorts it in numeric order, in alphanumeric order, whatever it happens to be. For each, every, sum, map, and filter except an optional second parameter, which is the value of the this keyword. And I'm not going to be going into that right now. The reduce and reduce right also accept an optional second parameter, which is the initial value for the previous value parameter in the function the method accepts. All of these methods, with the exception of sort, were created in ES5. Now next they show you a bunch of different examples. All right? And as you'll see in here, here are some examples. For example, push and pop. Push is used to add elements to the end of the array. Pop is used to remove elements from the end of the array. We've got slice and concat. Slice and concat create new arrays. In this example, the slice method is used to create a new array that consists of 2 elements taken from an array named names. Then the concat method is used to combine the 2 arrays into another new array. The join and the toString methods are used to create a string that lists the array's element. The sort we've already talked about. It's used, basically to sort things. If you want to sort elements in an array numerically, you have to pass a parameter to it. Okay? And the easiest way to learn this return x minus y, is to just look that up. All right? Is to just look that up on like w3schools.com. Here's a map function that's used to create a new array that contains the results of executing the function on each item of the original array. And then finally, there is a filter method here that's used to retrieve certain elements from an array. Again, it's like anything else. The way that you learn how to use this is by practicing. So the next thing that's shown, starting on page 480, we come back to our old familiar task list application. All right? Like before, this application displays the tasks that the user adds to the task list in the text area. Unlike the previous versions, this one does not store the tasks in a cookie like the first one we looked at, or in local storage, which is the second one we looked at. This is done so you can focus on how this application would use arrays. So the JavaScript is shown here and on page 481 in the book. The application uses an array to store the tasks added by the user. To display the tasks, the application uses the array's sort and join methods. To add a new task, the application uses the array's push method to add the new task. To clear the tasks, the application assigns a new array to the task variable, and it overwrites the old array. All right. Some other skills, some other things that you may need for working with arrays include the split method of the string object. Split can be used to divide a string into multiple substrings based on some kind of a separator character, be it a blank space, which is not a good separator, or be it like a comma or whatever. It creates a new array with each of these substrings as elements. So the first example that you see here shows how to split a string that's separated by spaces. All right, in this example, the second alert method doesn't need to call the toString method. The next example that's in here shows how to split a string that's separated by hyphens. So here we would be separating a date into its components. This next example shows how to split a string into individual characters. And the fourth shows what to do, what happens if the separator character isn't in the string. In fact, I think I jumped far enough into that. All right. And there are other ones too. Jumping up to page 484 and 485, all right. What they mention is so far when we've used an array, everything that we've ever put in for the arrays, where was, show me an array, come on. Everything that we've used that we put in here is an integer or it's a variable that has an integer value, but you don't have to do that. You can also create what are called associative arrays. Why would you want to do this? Let's look at a real world example, okay? I'm just going to add a little bit of code in here and just to show you this. Let's assume that I wanted to create an array and I wanted it to be an array of states, okay? I'm losing control of my machine here. All right, so I could, if I wanted to put in, let's say 3 states, all right, I could say var states equal, and I could put in bracket, and then put it individually, put in states 0 equal Missouri, states 1 equal Illinois, states 2 equal Wisconsin. I'm just going to keep it at 3 like this. Now I could do it like that, and that's fine. Or I could say var states equal, and when I did that, I could also give them the values at that time. So I could say Missouri, comma, Illinois, comma, Wisconsin. All right, I could do that, okay? And there are even other ways, but those would probably be two of the ways. But it's kind of tough to remember that 0 is Missouri, 1 is Illinois, and 2 is Wisconsin. So another way I could do this, and let me get rid of this one, is I could copy these in and turn this into what's called an associative array. All right? So instead of this, I could say, for example, so when you use an associative array, rather than using numbers for your indexes, you can use strings, all right, which typically makes the array easier to work with. And I just wanted to show you that myself because really the example that the author gives in here, although it's a fine example, all right, it maybe wasn't as easy to understand as the one I just mentioned. So when you create an associative array, you use strings as indices or indexes instead of numbers. All right. Again, it's kind of like a key value pair that we've talked about earlier. All right. You can create an array of arrays. Now, what the author mentions, and this is from the documentation, and is that technically JavaScript does not support the concept of multi-dimensional arrays, like a two-dimensional array, a three-dimensional array, etc. But it allows you to create an array of arrays. To do that, you store arrays in each element of another array. These arrays don't have to be the same length. All right, and you can put, for example, inside of a numerically indexed array, you can put an associative array. So there are some examples here on how to use these. All right, so here's on how to create an array and then how to fill it up. Here's how to create an array of arrays, etc. So JavaScript does not directly provide for multi-dimensional arrays, but you can get the same effect by creating an array of arrays. The arrays within an array can be regular arrays or associative arrays. To refer to the elements in an array of arrays, you use two index values. The first one is for the element in the primary array. The second is for the element that's in the element of the primary array. All right. If necessary, you can nest and have more than two dimensions. Be careful when doing this because it's hard to read and hard to maintain. All right. The chapter ends by giving you a more complex and complete showing of the task list application. The HTML and the CSS are mostly the same as what we looked at, but as far as a couple of changes that are in here, when you look, what we've done is we've done some jQuery UI that will allow us to bring a date picker in here. It's because we're adding a due date for it. All right, and that's what this is doing. So it lets the user store a due date to a task by using the jQuery UI date picker widget, and it stores the task and due date in an array of arrays. The tasks are stored in local storage in a single string. The text and due date are separated by tildes, which is the little squiggly thing, while the tasks themselves are separated by pipes, which are what you use for the OR operator. The JavaScript is shown on page 491. The ready function isn't shown, so this could be, most of it could be shown on the same page. The first function within the ready function is the display task list. This function basically will loop through the array and call the split method on each item, so you have your tasks. Next, it sorts the array of arrays by due date. It does this by passing a callback function to the sort method. Finally, the function sets the value of the text area element accordingly. And that pretty much is it for the chapter. So again, when I return tomorrow, I will hopefully be finishing this up by going over the last 2 chapters of the book, and I very quickly want to show you those because, again, these are 2 chapters that I am going to cover tomorrow, but I'm not going to cover in much depth or breadth of coverage, or maybe even at all in class, just because of time constraints. So chapter 17, let me close 16 here. 17 is on how to create your own objects, and 18 is on how to use closures, IIFEs, the module pattern, and plugins. They're both pretty long chapters. So I will go through, if I can, both of them, but at least one of them tomorrow. So I'll talk to you then.